It's time, Cougar Nation. Cougar Tracks. The best season analysis with BYU insider Mitch Harper on KSL NewsRadio and on video every day on the YouTube page for KSL Sports.
Welcome into Cougar Tracks here on the KSL Sports YouTube and KSL NewsRadio, your legacy home of the Cougars. It's a Monday, start of a new week, Monday, January 12th. And I am your BYU insider, Mitch Harper. So much to get to on this show as BYU basketball takes down Utah in a big rivalry win over the weekend at the Huntsman Center. But we got to start things off on the gridiron, where the job is not finished for one of BYU's top players.
The top story of the day. The biggest story in the world of BYU sports right here on Cougar Tracks.
Star cornerback Evan Johnson. Add him to the list of players that are running it back in 2026 for BYU football. Johnson, who probably more commonly known as Shmev on the BYU football team, he wrote on X over the weekend, "Job's not finished." He's running it back in 2026. Perfect quote. Kobe Bryant, he said that quote back in the day. I think Evan is a Lakers guy, I believe. I'd have to double check on that. He's from California. But Evan Johnson returning to this BYU football team that is loaded in 2026. You think about the Big 12 championship game last month against Texas Tech. 13 of the players that started in that game for BYU, they're returning in 2026. So more than half of the starters from that game. And look, that wasn't a great day at the office for BYU, but many players who experienced AT&T Stadium in Arlington and got a taste of that defeat and that motivation to run it back and try to get over the hump and go get that Big 12 championship. 13 of those guys are returning, and Evan Johnson added to the list. Here's the full list of guys that have announced from BYU football in 2025 that they will be returning in 2026. Quarterback Bear Bachmeier, running back LJ Martin, the Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year. Linebacker Isaiah Glasker. Wide receiver Parker Kingston. He was the leading receiver for BYU this past season. Star safety Falatau Satuala, a second-team All-American. Standout defensive tackle and captain Keanu Tanavasa. Cornerback starter Therian Trey Alexander III. Rising linebacker edge rusher Nusi Taumoepeau. Could he be the next Jack Kelly? Safety Raider Mooney. Linebacker Sialia Serra. Offensive tackle Andrew Gentry. Starting defensive end Bodie Schoonover. Defensive tackle Anisi Purcell. Starting offensive lineman, first team All Big 12 center Bruce Mitchell. Starting offensive lineman Kyle Safarachok. Offensive lineman Sonny Makasini. Viliami Buha. Defensive end, defensive tackle. Running back Jovesa Demouni. Wide receiver Tay Nakua. Tight end Noah Moiaki, safety Tommy Parasis, cornerback Evan Johnson, and then also hours after Shmev announced his intentions to return, defensive end Hunter Clegg made it clear he's running it back as well. I thought the Clegg addition or announcement was a little underrated because Clegg, a former four-star recruit, remember he initially signed with Utah out of high school. Then he served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints before deciding to flip to BYU. He was a top recruit for Jay Hill, huge priority for Jay Hill. And I think Hunter Clegg, the fact that he was starting and getting opportunities to play a lot as a true freshman, big future for Clegg. He made it clear, though, he's running it back for BYU. So this is a loaded BYU football team. And I think it's been fun to see the retention from this group because in a climate of college football where you're seeing quarterbacks like Damon Williams at Washington signing contracts, then backing off that contract, trying to exit, now he's crawling back to the locker room at Washington. You don't have those issues at BYU. I think it's impressive. These programs that are winning in culture are winning the day. And culture is kind of a cliche term in sports, but it does feel like those programs are winning out more times than not these days. And BYU's culture is in a great place, and it all starts with Kalani Sitake, who's led the way. And when you see this retention, with all the players returning, and you know BYU's going to field a good roster with the amount of players returning, you pair that up with returning missionaries, incoming freshmen, transfer portal players. There's a lot of buckets to pull from in piecing together the 2026 roster. Endless potential for this BYU team. I think on the low end, they're a preseason top 15 team next year. Honestly, they should be a top 10 team next year. But I think about BYU, why can't they be the next Indiana? Why can't they become that? And I know Curt Cignetti is fantastic. He's been excellent at Indiana. And look, they got the Big Ten patch. That almost gives them a little bit greater margin for error than BYU's Roman numerals logo, the Big 12. But retaining talent, identifying needs from the portal that are not just solely star-driven. Sometimes teams are so bent out of shape over chasing the biggest stars and overpaying for guys that they're not finding needs for their certain program. I think BYU, when they hit the portal after that first year in the Big 12 in 2023, where it was a complete overhaul and it felt like they were just adding to add to try to level up the talent, now it's more identifying needs, going and see if those guys will fit the culture and the program at large and help elevate the talent and bring competitive depth to the program. BYU's done a nice job with filling the gaps with the portal. 2 commitments so far. Kyler Casper from Oregon, a wide receiver and tight end out of USC, Walker Lions. Those are the two transfer portal commits right now. We'll talk more about the portal coming up a little bit later here. But BYU is doing an excellent job with building out its roster for the 2026 season, and getting this retention is big. And I think that it creates a situation where BYU is going to have such high expectations. But with what you see in college football these days, where Indiana, one of the losingest programs in college football history, is going to play for a national title 1 week from now, why can't that be BYU? Why? What's holding them back other than maybe a selection committee? If they can overcome that, maybe that's the biggest hurdle. But I think getting a taste of where they've been so far, knocking on the doorstep of reaching the playoff the past 2 years, and going up against a team like Texas Tech, who I still believe one of the best teams in college football this year, even though they laid an absolute egg against Oregon in the Orange Bowl. That defense was legit. BYU's knocking on the door. They're trying to build this thing up, and retaining it just stands out in a big way, where in this portal climate where everyone seems to be leaving these teams every single year, BYU's got the ability to retain guys. And look, it's not easy to just retain. It's not cheap to do that, but it gives you a great chance at BYU to go win at the highest levels, and that's exciting for BYU football. Let's take a break. Around the corner, we'll get to some BYU basketball talk here on Cougar Tracks, and it's powered by KSL Sports. Welcome back into Cougar Tracks here on the KSL Sports YouTube page. Every day, we're talking BYU sports, Monday through Friday. Even some Saturdays, too, with some post-game reaction. Cougar Tracks has you covered for all the latest with BYU football and BYU basketball every single day. Some transfer portal updates. Zak Yamauchi, he has committed to BYU. Former Stanford offensive lineman, interior offensive lineman at guard, 6'4", 325 pounds. That was reported by Jeff Hansen, 24/7 Sports. He notes that Zach informed him that he has committed to BYU. So that's a pretty important get. And Yamauchi is an underclassman with 3 years of eligibility remaining. And as a true freshman at a power conference program, he was already getting starts, had 3 starts under his belt last season for Stanford. So I think that's a noteworthy addition for BYU, and that brings BYU's transfer portal class up to 3 commits. Because when you look at the interior of BYU's offensive line, Bruce Mitchell's going to be your starter at center. No question about that. He's first team all Big 12. I think the guard position, though, you lose Waylon Lapuaho. You lose Austin Leausa, and Leausa probably could have been a guy that played all the positions, tackle, guard. He did that last season, last couple of years since he transferred in from Utah State, or Southern Utah, excuse me. You look at the guard spot, though, for BYU, I think there's opportunities for competition. Kyle Safarachuk, I think, is really good. I thought he was excellent last year in spring, and that showed itself at times this past year. I think he's a really good player, and I would have no problems with him starting. He started in the Big 12 championship game. I think he's an excellent football player. Sonny Mocassini as well. Have no problem with him starting if they turn to him. However, at the same time, both those guys, you got to level it up. You got to continue to move forward. And Zak Yamauchi, a younger guy, not as old as Mocassini and Safarachuk, but make sure that you're at your best self and don't get complacent, because there's always guys ready to take a spot. And I like that about someone like a Zak Yamauchi committing to BYU. Again, 6'4", 325 is Yamauchi, third transfer portal commit for BYU in this 2026 cycle. And keep in mind, too, right now, up until Thursday, it's a dead period in college football recruiting, but I wouldn't worry too much about that. It's a 72-hour dead period, but there's still going to be movement. When guys are ready to commit, they're going to make their announcements known and commit. So we're going to see a lot of activity here over the next few days. The final push to the last date of the portal being on Friday, and then the portal's closed. You'll still see some names trickle out of the portal on Saturday, Sunday, even maybe as late as Monday. The teams that are in the college football playoff national title have a little bit longer period, but for the most part, this is winding down this portal window, and BYU has navigated this thing quite well, and Yamauchi is the latest commit for the Cougars. Another offensive lineman, or couple guys to keep an eye on for potential announcements to see where they go, because they were in Provo this past weekend. That is Junior Seau. Junior Seau, a offensive lineman transfer from Utah State. He visited BYU over the weekend, and he posted some images of his time in Provo. And Junior Seau is a prospect who's a redshirt junior from Utah State, got some starting experience. He could come in and play a lot of different positions along the offensive line, but that's Junior Seau from his visit over the weekend. And then the guy that might be the most talented out of the group, potentially, if BYU could land him, that's Paki Finau, former Washington Huskies player. Started 4 games at left guard for Washington this past season. He's got 3 years of eligibility remaining. He was a 2024 recruit, 4-star prospect out of high school, out of California. Remember, at that time, for the 2024 recruiting cycle, that was with the previous offensive coaching regime. Some of the coaches that were on that staff in 2023, Paki Finau was being recruited by BYU, but it wasn't TJ Woods. TJ Woods recruiting Paki Finau here, and he visited over the weekend. He would be massive. I think Paki Finau, if you get a commitment from him, he's a plug-and-play guy, steps in and instantly starts right out of the gates, or at least you find a way to get him in games. And if you got Finau, Seau, along with Yamauchi, who committed, who told Jeff Hansen he's on the board, that would be a nice trio of offensive lineman commits in the transfer portal cycle for the 2026 season for BYU. So that's the latest on the transfer portal. We'll continue to have all the latest with BYU football and the portal here on Cougar Tracks and, of course, on KSLSports.com. Continuing, though, transitioning over to the 2025 review series. Talked about the wide receivers last week. Getting back to that today here on the show. Wanted to go over the defensive line and offensive line positions for BYU. The trenches are a massive piece to any team's success, but BYU has really tried to focus that as its identity of these teams. And coming out of the 2025 season where BYU goes 12-2 this past year and wins a Pop-Tarts Bowl, I thought these groups were really good. But one thing that I think is a common thread between the two is I think there's another gear or two to reach with these position groups. I thought you saw potential of some real impressive play, but I think there's more to be had in the years to come from these position groups. Starting with the defensive line, I thought the MVP of the group, there's a lot of candidates, and you could go co-MVP here, but I'm going to go with John Talmoy-Payau. I thought John Talmoy-Payau was one of the underrated players and standouts for BYU this past season. Look, we talked about him for a long time here on this podcast. If you're a longtime listener of Cougar Tracks, we've been discussing how impactful Talmoy-Payau would be for BYU football. We talked about it last January that he was going to be a really good player along this defensive front in 2025, and he was. I thought Talmoy-Payau was excellent for the Cougars. And look, some of his success was created and opened up by the presence of Keanu Tanavasa. I think Keanu Tanavasa, when you go back and watch some games, and I've been watching a handful of the games for BYU this past season. I'm trying to rewatch all the games again and write some additional notes heading into the offseason. But when you watch these games, Talmoy-Payau benefited greatly from being alongside Keanu Tanavasa because Keanu Tanavasa gets so much attention. And Talmoy-Payau is a talented football player that I thought he was really good for BYU. And it was fun to see. Well, it was interesting to see would be a better way to put it, that he put on X, Talmoy-Payau did, that he's maybe looking to get an extra year of eligibility, potentially, because of the JUCO years, kind of like the Diego Pavia thing from last season. Would I bank on that? No, I wouldn't, because what we learned last year, that whole JUCO stuff was basically an isolated deal for Diego Pavia. Initially was thought to be a broad deal that would allow for all former JUCO players to have extra eligibility. That became much ado about nothing because Darius Lassiter didn't get to go through the NFL draft process really to his full capabilities because he thought he was going to run it back. Same with Caleb Etienne. But so it'd be great if Talmoy-Payau could return to BYU, but we'll see how that plays out. Hopefully it can happen. I would love to see a lawsuit happen and he can get back to BYU because, again, he would be someone that would benefit greatly from one more year putting out extra film to try and reach the NFL. But I thought he was the MVP. I thought he was solid. Every single week you could rely on Talmoy-Payau. That's why I gave him the MVP nod. Most improved, I'll go with Bodie Schoonover. I thought Bodie Schoonover did a really sound job playing that bull edge rusher position, kind of took over for the Tyler Batty spot on the defensive line. 3 sacks this past season. His best game statistically was probably against Iowa State, but I think in terms of setting the edge, thought he did a really nice job in games this season. Bodie Schoonover goes into his senior season. He's going to be running it back. I thought he took a big jump forward in his development, and he moves pretty well. And I think Schoonover, just now knowing that he's had a full season where he can do it. Now next year, mind at ease, it's almost mastering his craft and taking it to a higher level next season. So I'm excited about Bodie Schoonover. Biggest takeaway, again, I think this defensive line scratching the surface. When you consider all the players that are returning from this group, I think this group is trending up heading into 2026. Some stats to know from the defensive line: 11 sacks from this group in 2025. They allowed 122.7 yards per game on the ground. That's pretty good. There were stretches where they were allowing a lot of yards in Big 12 play, but I thought near the end they kind of tightened things up. Texas Tech game wasn't great, obviously, but I thought BYU, all things considered, when you take the full season into account, they did a really good job. And they were excellent defending the run at home. Only 92.2 yards per game were allowed on the ground at LES. So defensive line, stout. And you got players like Anisi Purcell, who was dealing with injuries. Remember, he was playing with a club on his hand, and he still navigated that. I think Purcell is going to be a lot better next season as well. Tausilia Kana, Hunter Clegg, some of these young, promising defensive linemen that have big futures ahead of them. But even some of the guys that maybe people don't talk about enough or much at all, Orion Maile Kafusi, Viliami Puua, Kinilau Fonahema, really good football players on this team along the defensive line. BYU's got some standouts. They're going to be ones to watch in the future. But 2025, I thought was a step in the right direction for this position group. They do lose Logan Latui and John Tamoy-Pao. Those are the seniors that are departing from this defensive line. Looking at the offensive line, the MVP to me, Bruce Mitchell. First team All Big 12 center. He is an anchor in the interior of the offensive line, and he's going to be a captain and a face of the program going into the 2026 season for BYU. He's kind of a cut from the old days of the Kalani Sitake era. Under the radar recruit, developmental prospect, gray shirt, mission, take a long period of time between snaps from high school and BYU. Remember, he dabbled a little bit with defensive line, but settled in at offensive line, and he has been an absolute star for BYU. Excellent. You think about the continuity that BYU's had at the center position. Man, they've been really good at that spot. Empey, Pay, Mitchell. It's been a whole Kalani Sitake era where they've been really good at center. I think Tijon Karoma was at the beginning of the Kalani Sitake era. That position is always good under Kalani Sitake, and Bruce Mitchell has only added to that. I would say the most improved player, Andrew Gentry, former Michigan transfer. Remember his time at Michigan, played, and he got some starts, but sparingly, and he got banged up at Michigan. But I think Andrew Gentry proved that he is a legit power 4 offensive tackle, potential NFL prospect. When you look at Gentry, he's got all the measurables and the size. That's why he was a 4-star recruit coming out of high school at Columbine High in Colorado. Gentry could be on that NFL trajectory. And again, I've talked about it before. When you play the tackle position at BYU, that's the expectation at this point. You're going to be an NFL offensive lineman, and Gentry, I thought, took a great step forward. I thought he was really good this season. Biggest takeaway from this year along the offensive line, they were physical. This was a physical offensive line that embodied the identity of what Aaron Roderick wants from his offenses. And that's a physical football team that dominates you at the line of scrimmage. And there were games where you could get better, of course. Texas Tech games being prime examples. But BYU's physicality always showed up, I thought, every single week for the most part. There were not many games, if at all, where you said to yourself, where was the offensive line in that game? No, I don't think that happened at all. And testament to TJ Woods, this personnel, the offensive line, the work that they've put in. I thought they did a really good job this season. Some stats to know from the offensive line in 2025. 16 sacks allowed in 14 games. That was good for 13th nationally. So you want to get that number lower, of course, be in the top 10. But still, Bear Bachmeier was not taking many hits. And look, that's a credit to Bear and his ability to escape and get out of the pocket. But BYU took care of business keeping Bear Bachmeier upright. 178.3 yards per game on the ground. You got to open up holes for LJ Martin. LJ Martin is outstanding, but you got to have a great offensive line in front of you to protect and open up those holes. They did a nice job at that. I thought BYU dominated teams that were unranked, and I think this is noteworthy. They averaged 200 yards per game on the ground against unranked opponents, and I think that's noteworthy because I think there was a time in the Kalani era where people thought, oh, it's a mixed bag. You can go get a big win on the road against some ranked team, but then you have a total letdown. No, BYU's getting to that point where when you face an unranked team and you're the favorite, BYU's going to get it done. They're not going to have some head-scratcher performance. Yeah, maybe there was times against Colorado where you get down 14-zip, but they responded, and they got to do a better job at that, not digging themselves some holes in future years. But for the most part, their identity showed up every single week, which was running the football, and that's a credit to the offensive line. Players that are going to be gone from the 2025 offensive line, Waylon Lapuaho, Isaiah Jada, Austin Leausa, a trio of really talented players exiting due to eligibility being exhausted. Of course, Jake Griffin also gone as well to the portal. But Lapuaho, Jada, Leausa, they are the ones of the impactful players that took snaps this season. But again, good offensive line for BYU. TJ Woods, in 2 years as the O-line coach, has done an excellent job with this group, and I think they're only going to get better potentially in 2026, especially if they land some of those portal additions that we were talking about earlier this segment. Final break. Let's get to some BYU basketball talk as the Cougs are flying high after a big win over the weekend over Utah. It's Cougar Tracks, powered by KSL Sports. Welcome back into Cougar Tracks here on KSL News Radio and the KSL Sports YouTube page. Mitch Harper here with you. BYU basketball continues to roll. Even though the AP voters are not impressed, BYU drops from number 9 to number 11 in this week's AP Top 25. BYU is off to a 3-0 start in Big 12 play after taking down rival Utah 89-84 inside the Huntsman Center. And Richie Saunders finally gets his coveted win inside the Huntsman Center. There's been a lot of heartbreak against the Utes up in Salt Lake. First win for BYU in that building since November 2021. Only the second win there since 2011. So BYU, or third win, since 2011. So BYU, it's not easy winning in the Huntsman Center. And any way you can get that win, you'll take it. And Kevin Young, thoroughly impressed with Richie Saunders, who's one of the leading scorers in conference play in the Big 12 Conference.
Yeah, I mean, Richie's will to win is just like nothing I've ever been around. He all wanted to get a win for him here his senior year. And, he's possessed, man, in a good way. He just wasn't going to lose, bottom line.
How about that from KY? Richie Saunders' will to win is unlike anything I've been around. Like, when coaches say that, sounds like coaches speak, but when KY says that, that man's been around Kevin Durant. That man's been around Joel Embiid. That man has been around some absolute superstars, the best to ever do it in basketball. Richie Saunders, I think that we got to appreciate this guy because, like AJ, who's going to be a one and done, he's going to be probably the number 1 NBA draft pick next year. But Richie Saunders, what he's doing in his senior year, he's only ramping up, man. And I think it's going to be really exciting to see how this continues to progress because I still believe the chemistry between him and AJ and Rob Wright can only get better. I think that it's still been, I don't want to say a filling out process because they've been working out together since April, at least with AJ, since about June with Rob. But I think they can only get better going forward. But Richie was brilliant on Saturday night. 24 points, 14 rebounds. Just the intensity, the relentless nature, and the efficiency from the guard line for BYU. It's off the charts. I mean, when you're talking about a guard line like Richie Saunders and Rob Wright, so you get 47 points from the guard line between Rob Wright and Saunders. You get 15 boards, 14 of which from Richie. And then also 9 assists. That's just off the charts how impressive that is for BYU. Look, I thought BYU was going to blow out Utah. I thought this was the year where BYU just puts the hammer down on the Utes and crushes them. That didn't happen. And look, maybe you can nitpick that and say, is BYU as good as the Arizonas and the Iowa States in the Big 12 who are number 1 and 2 in the AP Top 25? I think they could be. And I think BYU will go blow for blow with Arizona in a couple weeks here when BYU hosts the Wildcats in a big Monday showdown, which will be just unreal. The price of tickets for that game is just going to be out of this world. I think it's already some tickets, $500 in the upper deck. Crazy. I'll have to look at the secondary market again. But BYU is rolling right now, and they're on a long winning streak at the moment. They're playing great basketball. And let's dive in a little bit further with the Cougar Stock Exchange.
The Cougar Stock Exchange. What's trending up and what's trending down? It's the Cougar Stock Exchange.
Every Monday we do this here on the program. Stock Exchange, what's trending up and trending down for BYU basketball. Say trending up, the zone defense. BYU in the second half had that 2-3 zone. They really gave Utah some headaches. A kind of rewatching that, you saw that had a real impact in the game. And I thought it was the right move because Utah, not the greatest of shooters from three. So that made a lot of sense. That 2-3 zone worked quite well. Also trending up, the ability to make A.J. DeBonsa almost a decoy. Utah sold the house to just defend A.J. at all cost. And now there's film that shows you do this, Big 12 teams, well, Richie's going to go off for 24. Rob Wright's going to get his. So buyer beware. If you want to just sell everything and defend A.J., it's still going to cost you. And keep in mind, A.J. still, on a night where Utah is double and even triple teaming him, 20 points, 6 of 11 from the field, 0 of 3 from 3. Want to get that up. 8 of 12 from the free throw line, 6 rebounds, 4 assists. A.J. DeBonsa, man, he's going to get his no matter what, and he's going to lift up his team in the process. I already talked about trending up. Richie Saunders, he's flying high. He's doing outstanding. Trending down the bench production, only 3 bench points for the Cougs. 1 from Bidu Ahmed and then 2 from Mihailo Boskovic. It's been unfortunate to not see the impact shooting the 3 ball from guys like Tyler Maruss. I mean, the losses of Nate Pickens and Dawson Baker, significant. If you had Dawson Baker, I don't think we're talking about lack of offensive firepower on the bench. But losing him when you did in Florida, losing Nate Pickens before the season even started, those were big adjustments, big losses to this team, yet they've still navigated through it all. And BYU still remains one of the top teams in the country with a 12-game win streak at 15-1 overall. But BYU turns its attention to Wednesday when they take on TCU on Wednesday night, late tip, 9 p.m. against the Horned Frogs. But it was a good win against Utah. And last thing before we get out, I thought Kevin Young, look, he's new to the whole BYU scene. He's acknowledged he's a member of the church, always respected BYU from afar, but didn't get caught up like many into the nastiness or the hatred of BYU versus Utah. But clearly, he understands the game means a ton, and this was KY after the game on letting the players who weren't familiar with this rivalry understand how important it was.
It was a hard-fought game, which we knew it would be. I mean, rivalry games are like that for a reason. It makes it super fun. I agree with AJ, just a fun environment. I mean, there's nothing better as a competitor to go into somebody else's building and beat them in their building, especially when it's somebody that there's a long-standing rivalry with. So really, it was really that. Usually sometimes I'll get into stats, this and that. Stats don't matter in a game like this. I just thought it was a really, really good, hard-fought win. And I just really praised, I pulled Rob, Moo, and AJ aside separately and just kind of whispered to them, hey, I know you guys probably you didn't grow up hating Utah or having a rivalry, with all due respect, of course, in a nice way. But this game means a ton to our university. It means a ton for Richie, and we want to send him out with the win. And that was really cool to see those guys step up in moments along with Kayla and Richie. So that was really the message. Just proud of the guys to, get it done.
Big-time coach Kevin Young, who has been rolling since he took over this BYU program. KY now in his BYU career is 41-11 in his record as the BYU head coach. Since regular season Big 12 play, BYU has won 11 consecutive Big 12 regular season games. That's impressive. In the toughest league in America, to win 11 straight in regular season play, really impressive. BYU playing at a very high level, but still, I think they can only get better going forward. Like you saw it on Saturday. There's moments where this team can tighten things up, get a little bit better, move this thing to a higher level, because that's what they're chasing. They're chasing a Final Four, and that's the goal in front of them. And so far, to be in a position where they're at, can't help but like what you've seen so far from this BYU team. That's going to do it for this edition of Cougar Tracks. We will be back tomorrow with all the latest with BYU football and basketball here on the program. It's powered by KSLSports.com.